In 1973, one of the men at Howard, Dr. Ulrich Henschke, a colleague, was a senior author on a paper, of which I was a co-author, and Dr. Jack White was a co-author, about the increasing incidence and mortality of cancer in black Americans. And every president likes to do something that's going to be something worthwhile during his year. I was president of the American Cancer Society in 1978-79. So at that time, we, the American Cancer Society, for the first time in its history, sponsored a conference in February of 1979 on the challenge of cancer in black Americans. The whole idea was to call attention to the disparities in terms of incidence, mortality, access to care for black Americans, but hoping that it would serve as the prototype to look at these issues in other racial and ethnic minority groups. To my knowledge, that was the first time any major organization had done this. Since that time, several groups have come on board looking at disparities. And I like to point back to this, to look at it, that we in the American Cancer Society, my colleagues and I, thought that this was an appropriate topic because some people told us we shouldn't do it. You're singling out one group here. It wasn't popular to talk about the fact that there were disparities then. This is 1979 we're talking about. See, more than 20 years ago. But since that time, the Intercultural Cancer Council, Zora Brown's Breast Cancer Resource Committee, Rise Sister Rise, there's so many that have come on board. Institute of Medicine has issued a report on the disparities in healthcare. So you can know why those of us who were involved in that really feel good that we were prescient enough to know that this is something that we should be talking about. We didn't know that. Somebody said, you know what's going to happen? You're going to have this conference. It'll be a nice report. It's going to sit on some shelves for years, accumulate a lot of dust. Fortunately, that did not happen. The most common cancer that we see in black men versus white men is what? Cancer of the prostate. Black men have the highest incidence, black American men, in contrast to black Africans, have the highest incidence of cancer of the prostate in the world. In the world. We don't know why. We've done studies with our colleagues in Africa trying to find out why. The best thing we can say is probably diet. Theirs with more fiber and ours with more fats and so forth. But that has not been proved. Cancer, in 1979 was true. We had more cancer of the lung then. Black men were smoking more, highest incidence. Since that time, cancer of the breast is still more common in white women than black women. But under age 40, it's about equal, and black women are gaining in terms of cancer of the breast. Cancer of the colon and rectum now, more blacks than whites, even though before it was more whites than blacks. So there's certain problems that we face that we have to look at. So therefore, it's important for us to talk about for women getting their pap smears, women getting their mammograms, people getting their colonoscopies, men having their PSA determinations. All of these are important because there are special problems that we face in the black community. And that conference in February of 1979 called attention to that.
Isn't it, in addition to the establishment medical societies not necessarily being that interested and open to certain kinds of health concerns of blacks, there is sometimes resistance in the black community as to being involved in certain kinds of studies, that there is a distrust of the medical community.
You are absolutely right. When we talk about involving people in clinical trials, we speak to a patient who has cancer and we'd like you to go on this clinical trial. Almost always, without exception, when I've done that, and many of my colleagues tell the same story, they said, oh, it's another Tuskegee experiment, huh? Going back to the syphilis study, when black men who had syphilis were not treated because somebody wanted to see what the natural history of the disease was. Just think about how despicable that is. You talk about something that's heinous, that is. But we still hear that, and we have to tell them, no, that's not so. And that's why we're trying to get more minority physicians to be involved in research, more minorities involved in clinical trials, but we have to let them know that we care about them as human beings, not as some number, not as a statistic, not as an integer, but rather, you are a human being. I know you're a human being. I respect you as that, and I'm going to treat you that way. That's why we believe it's important to have more minority researchers, because we believe, and people have told us this, if I see somebody asking me to engage in this who looks like me, then I believe I'm more likely to be involved in that. And that's what they tell us. And it's hard to prove that, but we have evidence that's probably so, and that's why we're making such a great effort to have black men and women who are in medicine or in the health sciences become involved with clinical trials.
Are there enough black men and women entering the fields of medicine that you are most concerned about in terms of dealing with issues of black health, or just generally, do you feel that we are making the kind of progress that's necessary as far as black men and women in the health fields?
I really think that we are getting there. I wish I could give you some specific numbers, but let me tell you what I mean by that. Years ago when I went to medical school, practically every black physician was trained. 80%, maybe even as much as 85% of black physicians were trained at two places, Howard and Meharry. That was it. Now, there are 4 predominantly black medical schools in addition to those 2, Morehouse in Atlanta, Charles Drew in Los Angeles. And all of the white schools, predominantly white schools in the South, want black students. They called me and asked me about some good students, but I tell them I want those too. See, I want the good students too. And in the white schools in the North, so there are more blacks now in the medical profession, the health profession, and I think we are getting there. Yes, I do believe we're getting there. What we've got to do is get more of them involved, and we believe in the cancer community becoming minority researchers, because we think then we'll be able to answer some of the questions that come up about black patients.
Do you still ever hear of things like, a white patient not wanting to be treated by a black physician, or the kinds of problems that an earlier generation of black physicians used to
I
face?
am so pleased to report that I believe that's almost non-existent. Now, maybe it's not non-existent, but almost. Now, why can I say that? How can I say that? Because I talk with my black colleagues who work in the South, who work at the University of Alabama, the University of Florida, and they said, we are accepted because we are qualified physicians. And the fact that they are where they are, said, well, he must be good. He's here, in particular if he's at a university, but even if he's not, if you're the black physician in that town, the white patients go there. So I do believe, and I say this, not a statistical study, not a randomized trial and all that, but I've talked with many colleagues over the years, and they tell me they think that that is something that's going to be soon, they hope, like the dinosaur, extinct. That kind of attitude, not that it would never be, but to the problem that it was when you were forbidden. For example, when you went to, I had a colleague who went to a white medical school and he couldn't examine women on the OB service. He was in the North. He was forbidden. The only time he could examine a patient was a black patient who was on the ward service. He could never even examine a white patient, even if that patient happened to be on what was called then the ward service. But that day, that's changing, and I do believe it's rapidly disappearing.